You go to a sushi restaurant and you think, this is how the Japanese culture lives. They eat tons and tons of rice, tons of raw fish, and some miso soup. That's not the main staple. And when you really look at like the Okinawans and you look at other regions of Japan, sure, they do eat rice. Okay, don't get me wrong. But they eat a lot of other things. And there's one thing, or two things in particular, that aren't really talked about. And if they are talked about, they're deemed as delicacies. Well, maybe they're delicacies more for us. But the one I want to focus on the most is shiitake. We think shiitake, like it's commonly talked about, like, oh, they don't have it that much. A lot of regions of Japan have shiitake every single day, and it's one of the most powerful things that you can consume. Like when you look at what it contains and you look at backing up with all kinds of different research, very fascinating, and it's a component of the Japanese diet that just about anyone could add to their diet no matter where they live. Okay, so there are huge cardiovascular benefits. So as we get older, shiitake is just something to add in. For one, there's something called iritadin in it. Okay, iritadin actually slows down the formation of cholesterol. It blocks the enzyme that would allow for certain cholesterol formation. Now, don't get me wrong, right? Cholesterol, we need it. We need it for overall sex hormone production and just life in general. But I think it's pretty common knowledge that when we start having too much of the wrong kind alongside highly inflammatory diets, that's when we run into a problem, right? It's not just the cholesterol, it's the cholesterol in combination with an overactive immune system. As a result, high inflammation, that's what causes those foam cells, that problem. But if we can slow down the formation of certain cholesterols, that's a benefit. Then there are sterols in it that slow down the absorption of cholesterol from the gut in the first place. Now, the Japanese diet in general is fairly low in cholesterol to begin with, but the data doesn't lie. Okay, if we potentially slow down the absorption of cholesterols that we consume from the diet, then great, that's less doing potential damage. And I say that with air quotes because we don't really know, and I don't want to pretend that we know, okay? But the other thing that is the most fascinating that I try to really tout the benefits of a lot, but it's just so hard to get it through, something called beta-glucans. Okay, beta-glucans are a specific kind of fiber, okay, very specific because it's not even like a normal fiber. It's kind of what gives mushrooms that jelly, kind of gelatinous, like almost layer, right? Now, what is interesting about beta-glucans, they are 250,000 glucose molecules bound together. But we, as humans, lack the enzymes to separate the bonds, to break apart those glucose molecules. So those glucose molecules never actually end up triggering our glucose. They end up being huge fuel for the gut. So this could be one of the major links with the Japanese culture and the overall healthy gut microbiome they tend to have. And ultimately one of the longest, if not the longest, life expectancy in the world. Okay, I'm not saying shiitake is going to make everyone live forever. Don't get me wrong. But interesting, okay, if we feed the microbiome, then obviously we have other impacts that trickle down from that. Feeding the microbiome, leading to more butyrate, which is a short-chain fatty acid produced by the microbiome, okay, which then can lead to better glucose tolerance, can lead to better fatty acid utilization, can lead to potentially lower levels of firmicutes and higher levels of what's called Bacteroidetes, bacteria associated with being leaner and firmicutes being lower, which is associated with obesity, okay? So very interesting things here when combined with the right kinds of foods. Now, obviously, you want to have good bacteria in your gut to begin with when you are feeding it. You don't want to be feeding a bunch of fiber if you already have a bunch of bloating and a bunch of problems. You might need to kind of revamp your diet first. But one of the things that people ask me all the time is, does a probiotic come into play here? Potentially, yes. I recommend taking care of your gut through food first, but adding probiotics in can be effective. There's one in particular, probably the only one I recommend. I put a link down below. It's called Seed. They are a supporter of this channel as well, but Seed is interesting because they're a symbiotic, which means they have a probiotic and a prebiotic. So if you look at it, it has a capsule inside of a capsule. So like if you shake it, you can kind of hear it, and you hold it to light, you can kind of see it. Another capsule inside of the already bigger capsule. So when you swallow it, you're potentially getting better colonization or getting better delivery to the right places. Plus, it's a prebiotic fiber plus a bunch of different strains that are heavily researched. So put that link below, use the code Thomas15 for 15% off. So 15% off your first order of the Daily Synbiotic from Seed down below in the description. Okay, but this is all Thomas DeLauer gobbledygook, so to speak, right? There are a couple really interesting studies, two that I want to reference that will kind of blow your mind. The first one is a rodent model study. So, you may rain on my parade by saying, yeah, that's with rodents, it doesn't matter. But we still look at the rodent model studies to get mechanistic data. So check this out. So this study was published in the journal Experimental and Therapeutic Medicine. Looked at mice, and they supplemented mice with shiitake. They found that the more shiitake, and the group that ended up taking in the shiitake, had lower levels of liver fat and lower levels of arterial plaque. Now the liver fat, I can't necessarily speak to mechanisms, but the arterial plaque, I probably can based upon how I opened this video with those 3 compounds and how that can impact things. But now let's look at the human study, because that's what we all really want to pay attention to when it comes down to it. So this study took a look at 52 subjects, okay, placebo, 5 grams or 10 grams for 4 weeks of shiitake. That's a modest amount. That's not all that much. You could easily get that in. Okay, and then what they did is after these 4 weeks, they took their immune cells, okay, and they cultured them so that they could study them. They found that those that had more in the way of shiitake had higher levels of IgA. IgA stands for immunoglobulin A, and immunoglobulin A is essentially the immunoglobulins associated with our gut. So if we have higher levels of IgA in our gut, that means that our gut is being protected. A lot of our potential inflammation can stem from things within our gut that should be hermetically sealed and protected in our gut getting into the bloodstream, causing our inflammatory response, right? So if that is contained because high levels of IgA are doing what they're supposed to do, containing the microbiome, containing the bacteria, containing the potential pathogens, but also improving gut integrity, then we have a good thing happening. And that explains why with this study, they also saw lower levels of C-reactive protein, which is inflammation. So they not only saw higher IgA, which most people would say, oh, higher immunoglobulins, higher immune system, that's going to be more inflammation. Not with IgA if it's contained in the gut. That means the immune system is active where we want it to be active, where there's a lot of pathogens. And those pathogens thereby potentially can't get into the bloodstream, lipopolysaccharides. Huge things here. Now there's one other piece that I want to talk about, and that's very interesting because it's just not discussed. So there's something else called Gobo, okay, also known as burdock in the United States. Gobo is a vegetable that has tremendously high amounts of very long chain inulin, one of the most powerful prebiotic fibers that you can consume. Okay, now I've done other videos talking about different things that Japanese culture eats, but these are 2 big staples, if you want to call them that. Maybe they don't eat as much of it as they do rice, but still very important overall. As always, keep it locked in here on my channel. I'll see you tomorrow.